All right. Hey Jimmy, let me know if you can hear me okay. Hey Thomas, can everybody hear? This is the main question. Sometimes we have difficulty syncing the audio on this. Okay, cool. So I have two pedal boards here. One is a switching rig, the other is a series pedal board rig. And a lot of people ask us a lot about why it may be better to use a switcher, why it may be better to use things in line. And so we can talk about that today along with some other stuff regarding pedal boards in general. Cool. Awesome. The lighting is okay. People can kind of see stuff. Try to use a really low or really wide angle lens today so we can kind of get a good visual of everything. Cool. Alright, no latency. That's good. Alright, so we're basically at the starting point of both of these. I've got the rigs and I've got them kind of laid out. I haven't started any of the process yet, and I kind of want to do these at the same time so when we put out our next video we'll really be able to kind of compare and contrast this, so you guys are getting a little bit of a preview. Hey Sam. Samuel. Cool. Alright, well, I'm going to get started and ask your questions and we'll keep going. Hey Sam, that was, or Samuel, that was me. I've been pretty straight up about all that stuff. And every single person that ever bought the access wall, so it's just one pedal, was given a full refund or whatever restitution they requested. So if you have questions about that in particular, or you own an access wall, you're welcome to email me and I can take care of you. Every single person that's requested a refund got one. So, and that happened about 5 years ago. So just to kind of put some context around that. Awesome. Got all the dual lock. Thanks, Campfire Guitar Store. Is that you, Will? So when laying on a board, do you prep pedals and go straight? No, I don't. I don't start detaching them right away. I'm just kind of getting out the materials here that I'm going to be using on this rig and just kind of making sure that I kind of have what I need. I actually won't even start putting stuff down until I've mounted this tier. And you can see we got a huge one today, the classic Strymon bridge. So this is actually going to be hard mounted into the pedal board itself. I might Velcro just the bottoms of the pedals just to kind of get them prepped, but I'm not going to go much further than that until after I dress everything. I can lay stuff out, but I'm not going to do anything as far as actually velcroing them down until we've got that done. Awesome. I'm glad, Campfire, that you're digging the DVD, or the DD, the dynamic distortion. You'll have to see this new video we have coming out with Campfire guitar star Will, where we're doing a game of tones with him, playing all the Appetite for Destruction stuff with the dynamic distortion. He sounds incredible. Jaws, yes, I got shorts on. They're on today. How do you route a wet dry? With a Boss switcher, I mean, you can't really, because you need to have some sort of splitter to do a real wet dry wet. So you'd have to, a lot of people, I think, misunderstand wet dry wet, because there's a couple of prominent folks out there that I don't think understand what it means, and so they've sort of propagated a sort of semi-accurate description. Typically, the way that a wet dry wet signal is immediately when you come in to the pedal board, you have some sort of splitter. One side goes to all of the distortion and overdrive and compression and dry effects, and then the other side would go into the modulation type effects, and then that could go into either you would take either the send out of an effects loop or a line out, and you would use that to go into either, you know, some sort of power amp. You could go into other amps to be your dry amps, or I'm sorry, your wet amps. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. But when you see like the rack system way of doing it, that you'd see Robert Bradshaw, guys like that, they typically would use some sort of splitter and actually split the clean signal so that you wouldn't get the any of the distortion in the repeats. So they would be kind of isolated, so you could mix delays and reverbs really wet, and then have distortion and you know, in the middle. Or you could just do straight up wet dry, or you could do wet dry wet and have like stereo monitors on the outside. Some guys use powered monitors. We'll do a wet dry wet soon enough. Let's see, Total Evo 7. Any chance of doing a board? The floor amp pedal. Oh yeah, actually, let me show you. I'm going to be doing one with this Quilter Interblock. I haven't even opened it yet, but it's kind of like the size of an MXR Phase 90. So we're going to be doing one of this. I haven't played it yet, so I'm not really sure how it sounds. But Quilter makes some really great stuff, and I think that I'd be surprised if I didn't like it. So we're going to do something like that in the future, but nothing that I have currently scheduled. So Quilter Interblock, if you want to check that out. Let's see. Hey Kyle, Benjamin, yeah, of course, I've built lots of them with them. I love them, they're great. But the thing that people, here's a cool thing about the switchers, that you don't need to actually get the 8 in a lot of cases, even though people think they do. So if you look at this rig, we have, you know, obviously the 3 Strymon, these are all MIDI compatible. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pedals, and 6 if you include the wah here, but we're not going to be using the wah. Let me pull this forward a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So we have 4 pedals up here. We have the wah, which is not going to be in a loop. That would be a silly choice. And we have the Strymon Sunset. And then there's a tuner out, which will feed the Polytune Mini. These Strymon pedals are not in a loop, but we don't really need them in a loop because they can be MIDI controlled by the ES5. So I can actually do all of my changes to whatever I'd want on here feasibly by using the ES5. And so the MIDI can control this stuff even though these are not occupying loops, because again, they have MIDI ports in the back, and I can control their function from here. So I don't need to waste loops with MIDI related pedals. I can just use the loops for the stuff that couldn't be switched through MIDI. So they're just the straight up kind of analog or single individual pedals that don't have any ability to do MIDI switching. So this is the way that we're doing on this one. Whereas ordinarily, if you wanted to have a loop for everything, then you would, need the 8. But this allows us to consolidate, keep the pedal board smaller, and not lose any functionality by using that ES5 versus an ES8. So just consider that as far as size is concerned. Yeah, you can't do stereo on the ES5. However, in this system that I've talked about, you can wire all these in stereo since they're being controlled by MIDI, and so you don't really have any effect of running stereo and having any disadvantage of that. So that keeps it pretty easy. Hey Jimmy Riggs, yeah, there's definitely ways of doing it on the board. I've done some for other players in the past, and if you look at on our website on vertexfx.com, you can see some that we've done in the past for different players that are pedal board based. But usually at the end of the day, I don't know that it gains you a whole lot unless you're really into the studio thing, and you need to have. I mean, the whole reason in the studio that they needed to do wet, dry, wet is because they were trying to eliminate having to have delay and reverb printed to a track. So like if you had everything in line and you were using delay and reverb into the amp, whatever came out of the amplifier was going to the track. Whereas in wet, dry, wet, if you have your wet effects in separate speakers or powered monitors or coming through a separate power amp, you could isolate those and you wouldn't have to print the delay or reverb or modulation or wet sound with the dry sound, and you could adjust that in post. And that was kind of part of the idea. And a lot of people have done variations of that, like Michael Thompson, a session guy in LA, does something really cool where he puts his effects between the mic and the speaker, kind of in a wet, dry, wet situation. And this just allows it, again, for studio guys, they can mix differently in the session, and then the engineer can go back and change things because, again, it's not coming through the main dry amp, so nothing gets printed unless you want it to be. You can go back and change that. So that's one of the benefits of wet, dry, wet. But for guys that are playing live, I don't think that there's a whole lot of benefit there. You could just as well use an effects loop. And that just kind of separates the wet effects from the preamp and the power amp. Let's see. With the ES5, can you use the Strymon multi-switch? I don't know. Written down. I don't know if you can, Pete. I haven't tried it yet, but there is two functions on the back of the ES5 that allow for control functions over here on this side, and it may allow you to do that. It's not something that I've tried to do, or there's been requested, so I just haven't investigated it, but it may be possible. I'm sure that there's people who've tried. Cool, Jared. Thank you for the shout out. Samuel, I'm looking at your question here about MIDI. Is there a chance you could do a tutorial of basic LVLs at level with that kind of pedal? Then use TRS. Oh, well, you mean TRS and MIDI are, because in pedals we only use the 3 middle pins on a MIDI connector. So on an TRS there's three tip ring and sleeve for the connections. So it's you can make those protocols work together with pedals, because the outside pins are typically for phantom power. I like the mix of straight through and switcher. Thomas likes the mix of both. Let's see. Cool. Hey, Jose. Hey, Jimmy. No, I haven't done... I know that they make those USB connectors, but I haven't done one on an interface, although it's a handy idea. Usually, before I put it on the board, I'll update them to whatever the newest software is, and then people can be responsible for updating on their own. We label all the cables and heat shrink them shut, so if they did need to pull the whole thing off, it would literally be impossible to screw it up unless you have really bad eyesight and you can't read the labels. But we'll label everything that comes in and out of this thing, like send 1, return 1, send 2, return 2, so it'll be very clear what's going in here if this needed to be taken off and updated separately. That's cool, Jimmy. Those cab Zeus's are cool. Gavin, I like the Boss a lot. I also like the RJM. I think the RJM is the best built of any of the switchers. Like, it's the most robust. Um, and one of the downsides of the RJMs for a while was that they didn't offer the same switching matrix where you could move anything anywhere. Um, but on the new one that they have, the 6X, that has that functionality. So you can literally move any pedal anywhere just like you can on the Bosses, but you have all the quality of the RGM stuff. So I'm really intrigued by that. They're sending one our way here shortly, so we're going to do a little comparison between the Bosses and the new RGM, and I'm sure it's amazing because all their stuff is built really well. But for value wise, the Boss is a great value. Zach Holcomb, MXR 78 Custom Badass Distortion. That's okay about it being off topic. I guess it just depends. I don't know anything else about your rig other than you use a 78 Custom Badass Distortion. So if you wanted more gain, then another distortion pedal. But if you just wanted to take the amount of gain and add more level, you could use a booster after it, or you could use a booster before it if you wanted to saturate it more, but not quite the same way as another distortion pedal would. So it just kind of depends. Yeah, Samuel, it's they're available at Guitar Gear in Mexico, so definitely go and check them out. Tag us in a photo if you go. And all the switchers will allow you. I mean, you can combine. You can use it as a true bypass looper if you want. You can combine all the pedals if you wanted. The RJM editor is pretty easy. I think the Boss one's pretty easy too. I guess it's a personal preference, but I like them. I got the hang of both of them in about a half an hour. So I think that they're both great systems. You know, if you want the Rolls Royce, the RJM's the one to get. If you want just like the great value, you know, like the, I don't want to say Honda Civic because, and it's definitely a far jump from a Rolls Royce, but it has that sort of, you know, they're very reliable, they're very well built, and they're great value, but it's not quite as high end as the RGM, but I think they're both great. Sure thing, Zach, and you're welcome, Craig. I realize I'm talking here a lot and not Velcroing much. Let's see if I can multitask. Zach, your MS3 is great. One cool thing that we're doing another pedal board on here this month is with the MS3 and kind of using some other pedals to kind of intermingle with it. And if you're not familiar with the MS3, it's essentially a Boss multi-effects unit that has all of the Boss like digital delays and reverbs and modulation inside of it, and then it has 3 loops for analog style pedals, and that's sort of like a really, really good compact rig, and I'll be showcasing that one in a separate video. But man, it's really cool. Like if you needed like a grab and go board that did everything and could do like 4 cable method, like effects loop stuff, it is unreal. It sounds really, really good. It can take line level, it can take instrument level, and you can use your 3 favorite, you know, analog dirt pedals in there, and then kind of use that as sort of a, you know, an everything else sort of thing, almost like the same way you might use like a HX Stomp, or you know, in the old days they had those Nova systems that TC made. Kind of is like a, I think, a newer, cooler version of what that did, and it sounds really, really good. The Toyota Camry of switchers. Yeah, AJ, I use the Helix. They're cool. I just don't. It wouldn't replace a pedal board, I don't think. Like you know, for sonically, but they are cool and they sound good. You should check out Rhett Shull's video where he kind of does a comparison thing with it. Yeah, Inca Block. Yeah, I kind of just talked about it a little bit. They work great in the effects loop. I mean, I don't have every single amp, and there's no standard for effects loops, so I can't speak to everything. But in the amps that I have that have effects loops, it works great. I'm loaning it to one of the guys that works with us, Hunter. He uses a Sir Badger, and I haven't heard him say anything that it doesn't work in the loop. With that amp and the amps that I have here that have effects loops, I haven't had any issues. So I'm imagining that in the majority of situations, it works great. Total Evo 7. If a board was built with both a volume and wah, which would go first? Granted that a loop MIDI would be used or not. Well, it depends on what you want the volume pedal to do. I don't typically like the volume pedals to come before gain pedals because your guitar volume pot will do the same thing unless you have a rare guitar that has no volume control on it. So by adding a volume pedal in front, it's really just a redundant control that already exists on your volume pot on your guitar. So typically I recommend using volume pedals after your gain pedals because it allows you to use it as a master volume. So you can kind of get all the burn tones at lower volume without changing the gain structure. Because as soon as you turn down any of your volume pedal and you have your volume pedal first, it's going to change not just the volume but the whole gain structure of the entire board. And I don't usually recommend doing that unless you're trying to control it with your guitar itself. So I'd say put the wah first, put the volume pedal after the distortion devices. Watching live from Uber, I bet you're, well, if you're a driver, be safe. If you're a passenger, I bet your driver loves it. Yeah, I'd seen that they had done one on the volume pedals. I didn't get to the content part about it. Jaws, just putting some 3M on yours too. It's always the way we start. Yeah, Daniel, we're doing the John Mayer clone board. It's just something that we're going to be kind of leaking out over, you know, the course of the next maybe 6 weeks or so. So I'll give you updates on that periodically, but the giveaway is not today. A Camp, can I spill the beans about any pedals? Well, there's one that we've kind of teased out a little bit periodically, which is called the Nile, and it's a compressor and a console preamp in one pedal. And the idea is kind of along the lines of what, you know, Prince and Nile Rodgers used to record clean guitar back in the day, where they would use an 1176 into a Neve console, and they would use the console or the Neve to distort the console preamp. And so you have your compressor, you have your console, and they're both on separate foot switches, and you can use them either independently or you can use them together, and you can get those really classic kind of like funk rhythm compression tones that you would find in an old Prince record or a Chic record or a Sister Sledge record or that sort of thing. Because that's one of the kind of the ultimate clean tones in my opinion, is that some of that Prince stuff and some of the stuff that Nile did, even up to as early or as late as Daft Punk. So this is kind of that classic studio kind of guitar, like funk rhythm tone that you use a Strat with, and so that's the next thing that's coming out, and that's about, I'd say, 8 weeks away. I just sent out to get the first articles, so I should probably have them in about 4 weeks, and then pending that going well, then probably another 4 weeks before it's actually out. Let's see. Jimmy, your question about the Strymon bridge, yeah, it's going to be screwed into the entire rig. So there'll be a bass. I have another one here. So you see that there's, I don't know how well you can see the lighting, but there's holes here. There's some PEM nuts, which are on the inside of that are just kind of like threaded nuts that are like riveted into the actual structure. So I'll drill this through and I'll mount it up through the bottom, and this will be solid, like, you know, bolted into the board. And then this top can remove, and so then that way I can make adjustments as we're going. But I like to mount this first before I actually start securing things on the board. That way I don't have any issues with spacing. I know where everything's going to go. I know where kind of my boundaries are by mounting this first. Daniel Taylor, if we win, does it come with a John Mayer ex-girlfriend of our choice? Only in your mind, I suppose. You know, I can't control I can't control that part. You're welcome to send them a fan email, I suppose. See what they say. YouTube Luthier. I'm trying to decide how to power my board. It's small. Been using it one spot and it works, but I'm going to run into problems. Yeah. Well, I give a recommended list of power supplies in the description box, so you can check out what I recommend, and all those would be great. And you don't necessarily need to buy any of them new either. So if you can find them on Reverb, or you can find them on eBay or wherever it is, I'd recommend getting one of those. But I've also listed where you can get them on Amazon. And that's just so everybody kind of has Amazon these days. So I figured it's sort of a central place that we can all find gear on without an issue. Well, Total Evo, most of the ones that have volume loops on the switcher, and what Total Evo is asking about is just like volume pedal placement stuff. You can assign where the volume pedal sits, at least in the Boss one. You can assign on the ES8 where it sits in relationship to the other pedals, and you can adjust that depending on the patch. So you could have one patch where you want to use it first if that was a reason or something that you needed to do, and then on other patches you can have it be after other pedals, so you can pretty much move it around as you desire. VIP rideshare, Schofield Rocklet with a pedal board. Well, that's cool. Yeah, with that John Schofield rig, or we didn't stay for the show. I just stayed for through the sound check, but it was a pretty long sound check, like an hour, so we got to see a pretty good amount of the set. And I thought about going back and buying some tickets and coming back in, because I like to try to support the artists when I can. I mean, some of them will insist on putting us on the guest list, but I usually feel like it's important if you can to try to support the people whose music you like. But when I walked outside of that John Schofield gig, the one that was the last video we put out, my car was towed. And so I had to figure out how to get that out of impound, because the next day was How's that? We back? Alright, there we go. Yes, I don't know where it left off, something about impound, but anyway, my car got towed with the Schofield thing, so, but even if I hadn't gotten towed, I probably wouldn't have gone, because, sometimes staying out late on a Friday is tricky in San Francisco. It can take quite a while to get back, and I just don't have the stamina, but I was really excited to see John. That was really fun, and, you know, if my car was gonna get towed, it was worth it that it was Schofield's, so, Schofield's gig, that I got to see a sound check and got to hang with Uncle John. Let's see. Oh, where I left off, AJ, was the next day was? The next day was my birthday after the John Schofield thing. And my wife had some stuff planned, and so I needed to make sure that I figured out how to get my car out of the impound. It turned out that it was really easy in San Francisco. I think that, you know, they have a good system for that, and it was totally my fault. I was in the wrong. I just didn't read the signage properly. The one day that I was there was the one day that they have a towaway zone for 2 hours, so that was on me. But again, we're seeing John, and you know, his video that we put out with his rig did really well. So I'm glad that there was at least that part. Any update on the Songbird chorus? Well, the update is that I really wanted to try to use the original Bucket Brigade chips, and I couldn't find a stockpile that was as that had enough working chips where we could use it. So I kind of had to go back to the drawing board and figure out something that would work equally well. There's a Chinese company called XVive or XVive that has some replicas of some of those old Panasonic chips, and like the delay chips, like the 3005 that they used in the Memory Man and the Boss DN2. But you know, it doesn't sound quite the same, so I'm trying to figure out how to compensate for some of those differences. And once I can get that figured out, then I will have a more accurate release date of the Songbird chorus, which is essentially a tri-stereo chorus. Let's see. Alright. Velcro, Velcro. And we won't Velcro the wahs. I hard mount these through the pedal board. So we're going to leave that guy alone. Alright. Here's the inline rig. So we can get that out here. Let's see. JHS Video claims Behringer owns the Bucket Brigade chips factory now. He may. Josh would probably know more about that than I would. I don't usually stay too up to date. I mean, Behringer's got pretty deep pockets. They own a lot of stuff. They own a lot of the music industry. So I believe it. Jaws, what happened to the Arion Course pedal? You modded. Well, it was a signature pedal, and with Michael Landau. And when our professional relationship ended with Michael, we discontinued the production of that product. But it had kind of been something that we were trying to figure out how to transition into its own pedal, even if it was still a signature pedal, because the Arion courses were just so poorly built that we, in all honesty, half of the ones that we would get in would not work, like brand new. Like when we would get them from Arion, half of them wouldn't work. So we would have to repair half of them before we could ever modify them. And it created a real problem in our production line. It was a real nightmare, and it was hard to make those cost effective for us to even build them. They were that expensive to make, and it was sort of a ridiculous price too for a plastic pedal. I think we were charging $200 or $250 for it, and we were still barely making money, especially if we sold it to dealers where we would be giving them, you know, a large percentage off of the street price. So it was a tricky one. You know, I really liked that pedal, and it sounded great, but it was not an easy pedal to manufacture. Most overrated pedal you have come across? I don't know. That's a tricky one. I don't know, none that I can think of off the top of my head, although I'm sure that I've thought that before. Thanks for combing my hair. I even brushed my teeth, but you can't see that. You got it, Braxall. Have you seen those new stomp traps? Huh, I haven't seen it, but I can't imagine that it's a better situation than the Dual Lock. But I'm always open. I have an open mind. I'll have to check it out, or send me a link in this chat, and I'll look at it. Yeah, I've never heard of the pedals. Like, I don't know. I don't know anything about those. Volume before dirt. Where's the wah go? No volume. I don't like volume before dirt. I like it after. So I would recommend using it after your dirt, and then wah, I'd say put either first or after a fuzz if you have a impedance sensitive fuzz, like a fuzz face or something. I usually use the wah after, just because the sweep is so affected if you use those two together. Yeah, thanks for that, Brex. I'm gonna take a look. It says it's holding the link for review. I think just because it thinks it's spam, but I'll be sure to have a look. Kyle, yes, I've tried it. I'm not going to mount this guy just because this is going to be going through the board. So I'm going to mount this guy through the board, so I'm not going to use any Velcro on it. I'll let you know, Braxall, once I have a chance to take a look at it. John, does the ES5 suck tone, or is it... I mean, the buffer is not, from what I can tell, I haven't looked at the circuitry. It seems that it's a little bit different than the standard Boss buffers. Even so, is it perfect? No, there's better buffers. My favorite of like the commercially available ones is the Mesa Boogie Highwire. I think that one sounds the best, and it's an actual dual buffer, meaning that it has a buffer on the input and a buffer on the output, which is ideally how you want to do it. Most buffers that are commercially available are really output buffers, and they recommend people to put them on the input, and they're kind of just different things. The application for an input buffer and output buffer for different purposes. Most of the companies that make buffers are making output buffers, really, but they're telling people to use them first. And Mesa Boogie does a good job of differentiating the purpose of the two and where they should go in accordance with that, and really treating the input buffer as a pickup loading component to avoid any sorts of issues with the impedance of the guitar pickups and what the guitar is used to seeing when it plugs directly into an amp. So it kind of fixes a lot of that issue, has a nice 1 meg input, and I think theirs is even Class A, which is kind of like the Pete Cornish style thing for the input buffer, and then they have a really nice line driver on the output. And their buffer is designed by Mario from Axis Electronics, who made one of the really nice first commercially available buffers called the Axis BS2. So he's a real engineering genius when it comes to buffers, and so I don't think that they could have hired a better guy to design that product. So check out the Mesa Boogie Highwire. It's one of my favorite commercially available buffers, if not my favorite that anybody's making right now. So YouTube Luthier, wah first, not volume last, but volume after distortion. So after your distortion pedals, you will put the volume pedal. Your auto wah, well, it depends. It'll react better the closer that it is to... Here's Zeke. It'll react better the closer it is to your guitar. Although some people have really good results using it later down the line. Like I noticed that John Mayer on the Dead & Co stuff uses it after distortion. So that's one thing to consider. But there's more than one way maybe to do it. You got it, Daniel. I'll keep it classy. Zeke, come on. Come on. Angry dogs. Let's see. What length screws are you using when you're drilling through the board? I think I'm using on the volume pedals like 1.25 inches, and then I might build it up a little bit with some washers. What do I think about the Prism pedal or the new Danelectro Breakdown? I don't know. I don't know either of those pedals. For the pedal board stuff, it just depends on what's going on there. It's really the amount of time that it takes. Most of the clients will procure their own materials that I've told them to get, you know, kind of based the same materials that I link in all the videos. So, you know, I'll have people get the right amount of materials, and then they'll just pay for the time. But I don't do boards on like an ongoing basis. It's really just for the channel. So you have to have a board that would somehow work into the things that we're doing for the coming months, that works with what we're trying to explore, what we want to teach, So because this is not how I make my living, I make my living off of guitar pedals, and that's a very self-sustaining thing. And our goal this year was to take on something new and really develop the YouTube channel. And so I'm trying to kind of keep that sacred and just build rigs that help us illustrate things that that people are asking about. So if you're looking for somebody who will build you anything you want, I'm probably not your guy, but I'd be happy to teach you how to do it yourself. That's really the goal here, is that people are learning how to take this on for themselves, and they're learning how to build their own rigs. And that's really the purpose of why we started the channel. And but if you want someone to do it for you, there's lots of great people that can do it. Depending on where you are, if you email us, I can give you a list of a couple of people I think do a really good job. Necrosonic 1 guitar rat amp. Well, in that situation, you probably wouldn't need a buffer unless you were using a really long cable going back to the amp. Is having a delay reverb delay normal? You could do it that way. I mean, if it sounds good, it is good. William, we ever do an acoustic rig? That's a good question. Nobody's asked me one. That would be a good future rig if somebody's looking to have one built. I haven't done an acoustic rig. I mean, I guess this one might be used for acoustic because it's got the Bob Weir's Real Deal acoustic preamp. Apparently it sounds great on electric guitar too, so don't know. YouTube luthier compressor before dirt, I would say. Braxall, I don't know Brian. I don't know him, but it sounds like he builds pedal boards. All right, I think we got Velcro done on both these boards. I'm gonna start drawing stuff out. By the way, if you're gonna draw on a pedal board, Home Depot pencil, very best. Necrosonic. Yeah, but those are the people that pay all of our manufacturers' bills for the most part. I mean, very few of the people that buy gear are professionals. They just love quality stuff, and they want to sound awesome on those 2 gigs a year that they're playing in a wedding band. I appreciate that, Braxall. That's the goal. The goal is to leave the space better than we found it. Where would you place a Boss ME50 multi-effects pedal? I mainly use the Univibe and delay settings. Yeah, just put it at the end, Zach. I don't think that there's enough there to justify any other location. All right. Let's see. Thanks, Nathan. I would say to put the light speed before it because it will saturate it more. You're welcome, Zach. Joe, we can talk about it right now. I mean, we've sort of been kind of going in and out. I think we got a little bit on a different subject. But really the reason why we're talking about it is because I'm building two boards. There's this one here, there's this one over on the floor. And this one is inline. That one is using a switcher. And so a lot of people have been asking us in some of the commentary about why we might use one over the other. And, you know, in my mind, with switchers, the benefit is obviously you get, you know, isolation, you know, from a lot of the external factors that happen. But as far as creating presets, though, if you're like a session guy, I think that switchers are still not ideal for that circumstance. And that's why when you look at most like session guys rig, whether you're talking about Tom Bukovac or Derek Wells or Michael Landau or Michael Thompson, none of those guys use switchers, mainly because they're not playing the same stuff every day. And if you have a set list or song list that you're playing to, the switcher is invaluable because you have all of your sounds preset. And so you don't have to waste a lot of time dialing that stuff in. But if you're playing something different for a different person every week, then having those presets makes a lot less sense. So that's why you usually see most of the top session guys don't use switchers, but a lot of the touring guys do because they're playing a predictable set list night in and night out. Whereas the session guys are not very, you know, they don't have the same predictability in what it is they need to do. And I remember once Tom Bukovac telling me that he liked the M9 not because it was the best sounding pedal in the world, but because if a producer said, you know, I really like that tremolo sound, but I really wish it was more of, I don't know, had a little bit fewer or a little less intensity or a little bit more speed, that he can make that adjustment instantaneously, where sometimes with a switcher and MIDI you'd have to reprogram. It doesn't happen as easily. So these are just things to consider if you're playing at home and you're playing different stuff every time, you're not in a band, switcher may not be useful. But if you are playing in church or you're playing in a cover band or you're playing in your own band, you have a set list of things that you do that you can program and it's repeatable, I could see the value of a switcher. Most people that get a switcher don't need one. That's the truth. But it looks really cool. It can cut down on some of the noise, but if you have somebody who's building it professionally like me, I can pretty much make them where they're unintelligible, sonically and noise-wise. But if you're doing it yourself, I could see where there'd be some drawbacks, there'd be some fear, and it's a lot easier to isolate a problem if there's a bad pedal or a bad loop, or a bad cable, you can just bypass that loop and you're good to go again. But all in all, I don't know that it's the best way to go. You know, it just really depends on what you're doing. Can I run 12 volt pedals in a 9 volt pedal, or can I run 12 volts in a 9 volt pedal? Brian, it would just depend if the pedal can accept that. I would say no as a general rule, unless it states otherwise in the manual, and you might have to ask the manufacturer. But I would say generally as a rule, no, don't do that. Jose, we got the pedal board in for the John Mayer giveaway, but we haven't started the build process yet. I got some other people that are ahead of the line there that I've made some commitments to, so we're going to get these done first, and then toward the end of the month, I will get into the John Mayer rig. Thanks, Braxel. Neurosonic, you're the best, man. Those are cool old pedals, the DL5. I dig it. Are you running the boards for cable method or in the front, Inca block? And these are all in the front. But the only time that the 4 cable method is useful, I mean, first of all, you have to have an effects loop. What he's talking about, for people who don't know what 4 cable method is, it means you have a guitar input, an amp output going into the front of the amp, and then one cable for the send and the other cable for the return that's taking usually the delay and reverb in the effects loop. So that's what he's referring to in the 4CM thing. And you know, a lot of people use effects loops and they don't need to. The only time that you really need to use an effects loop for an amp is if the amp is providing the gain and the pedals are not providing the gain. You know, because if you say you're using a delay in front of an amp that has a lot of gain, that would be like taking your delay pedal, like this Echolution, and putting it before the overdrive devices. It's essentially what it's doing, or kind of sonically what it's doing. So there's, you know, that's only in the case though if you were using something that's high gain, like a Friedman or a Naylor or a Soldano or something like that, where you would need to use the effects loop to keep the repeats of the delays not going into input of an already distorted amp, because it doesn't sound good. And it's really hard to make it sound good. However, guys like Van Halen used an Echoplex in front of a Marshall amp and it sounded incredible, but that's, you know, a separate topic. But I would only say the value of the effects loop is if you have a high gain amp that you're using as a high gain amp, and so you would need to put delays and reverbs in that loop to be able to mitigate some of the effects of the distorted preamp. Nathan, I appreciate that. Well, we're going to get into it in more detail when I publish the video. Hopefully I'll have this out by next week. I have a bunch of stuff though. We just did a reboot video with Zapata. If you haven't watched the Zapata rig that we did with for the Gary Clark Jr. tour, that one, we just did an addendum kind of board for him. He was just here yesterday and actually today as well, not for the board but just to hang. And then we went and visited the guys that make not only all of our enclosures but the Strymon Bridge as well. Did a cool interview with them out, you know, kind of out in the LA area. So we have a couple videos coming. I got this one coming and some other good stuff. Isaac, what type of pedals need to be on bypass loopers if you can only to a limited number? I would say things that are not MIDI equipped, Isaac, you want to put in those. Things that have, you know, it's sort of a can of worms, but I would say things that have poor quality buffers, or buffers generally. If you spend a lot of money on a high quality buffer like the Mesa Boogie Highwire, which is the one that I like the best, if you spend a good amount of money on that and you're using terrible buffers in between, that that sort of undoes the effectiveness of the quality of the buffer that you just bought. And so the idea with a buffer, let's just pretend for example that this black box is my buffer. I'm going to put it right up here, and it's going to be the first and last thing. Let's see if I can get it. Okay, I'm going to put it up here on top of my volume pedal. This is just representative. This is my buffer. Let's say it's a super high quality buffer like the Mesa Boogie. It's got an input buffer and an output buffer. That means that the first thing my guitar hits is going to be the input buffer, and the last thing before it goes to my amp is going to be the output buffer. Audio should be back. All right. Are we back? All right. So let's go back to the buffer conversation. How much of the buffers did we hear? How much of the buffer conversation did we hear? If anybody can chime in on that. Okay, we're going to start back with the buffer on top of the volume pedal. Okay. All right, so let's pretend. Actually, let me get the Mesa Boogie buffer because this will be easier visually for us. Be right back. Alright, Mesa Boogie buffer. This is a dual buffer, which basically means that it has an input buffer that goes out to all the pedals, and then after the last pedal it comes back in and has an output buffer that drives the line back to the amp. So for a moment, let's pretend that we've plugged in our guitar into the input buffer. So right now, in this situation, we pretty much have everything as true bypass with exception to the super octave. So what's going to happen is I plug into my buffer, high quality buffer, and it's buffering everything over till I get to the super octave, and then the super octave is now my buffer because this is a buffered pedal, so it's undoing the quality of my input buffer from this point forward until I go back to this output buffer section, which is going to drive back to my amp. So I have high quality for about 1, 2, 3, 4 pedals, then it goes to this, and then for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I have the Boss as my low quality buffer. So this is why you want to make sure that if you are going to use a true bypass switcher or looper, you would want to isolate stuff like this, because the buffer quality in this is going to screw up the quality of the input buffer that you would want to be going through everything if everything's in bypass. Now the other thing to remember is once you turn on a pedal, whether it is true bypass or not, if I turn on the tone secret, it's true bypass. As soon as I turn it on, this is now acting as a buffer. Any pedal that's on, whether it's true bypass or not, as soon as you turn it on, it is a buffer at that point. So let's say, for example, I have my good quality buffer here. I go 1, 2, 3, I turn this pedal on. Now this is the buffer until this pedal, and then this pedal, as soon as it hits the octave, now this is the buffer because this has a buffer in it, and then that's going to drive the line through whatever else. Let's say I turned on these two guys, the Big Sky and the Ecolution, then these guys are going to be buffers until I hit the output buffer on the Mesa Boogie. So you can see how this buffer thing adds up, and by having inferior pedals or inferior buffers, you can get a lot of added noise because you have all these buffers amplifying the gain stages as you add more and more in. So having high quality is incredibly important with buffers. This is why I think the Mesa Boogie one is the best commercial one available. The reason why is it has one of the best line drivers on the output. I would say that it is along the lines and comparable to what the Vertex Boost does, which is the highest that I'm aware of. And then their input buffer is designed separately, so the output buffer is a totally different circuit, like a different pedal completely than the input buffer, because they're trying to control for pickup input impedance. They want to make sure that the pickups are seeing an input impedance that looks like an amplifier. So they do a really good job of designing this to make it look, from the guitar standpoint, like it's an amplifier input. And then it converts the signal down to low impedance, and then when you come back, it has a super low impedance output line driver that's driving those long cable lines back to your amplifier. This is definitely, I think, the best one, but again, this is a case to use true bypass loopers or modify these pedals to true bypass, because from a sonic standpoint, this is not going to reproduce the best possible version of your tone. Not that it's not a great pedal, this is just kind of, it could be a compromise in the sound, maybe it's worth it, But if you can avoid it, it's definitely worth avoiding. Benjamin, the high wire can't go into stereo heads. It only has a single output buffer. I don't know if we can see here. So these are the sides that would go in and out. You know, so this is the input, this is the output here. They do make a secondary buffer that you can add that's an output buffer that's just kind of like in a small case, like a, I don't know, like a tap tempo size. That's a separate output buffer. So if you did want to run stereo out, you could run one out of this box and you could run another out of a smaller box. But this is, as far as commercially available, best one that I know of. You can also assign the foot switch to be a boost, so that you can boost it. It also has a level compensation control, so you can, let's say you have a humbucker guitar that's really hot, you can pat it down and then boost up the single coil, and then it also has a tuner mute. So you can have a tuner running out of this as well, so you don't have any weird parallel loads running out of a volume pedal or something like that. So this is the one I think to get. I don't think I have this one listed, and I don't think it exists on Amazon, but if you go to their website or Sweetwater, I'm sure that everybody's got that. Jeffrey, well, if the looper's in bypass, then they're true bypass. But as soon as you've introduced any pedal, whether it's buffered or not, into the line, it's buffering at that point. And this is the reason why having a high quality output buffer is so critical. Because if you turn on a pedal and it's the only pedal that's on, and it's not a great line driver, and most pedals are not designed to go through 6 pedals and then drive a 20-foot cable out to your amp, you're relying on the pedal too heavily to reproduce the sound without losing any fidelity or adding distortion or compression or EQ change. So this is why I recommend people have both input and output if they want the closest resemblance to a guitar cable plugged straight into their amp. Does Mesa Boogie make that add-on buffer? Yeah, that's precisely who does. I think they call it the Stowaway, is the name of it. But and it's sort of like a small addendum buffer that you can use for that. I don't know whether they have any that offer transformer isolation for stereo, which would be ideal. And the buffers that I build, I do that. But I could understand for like commercial appeal that having that would not be the best way for them. So they may not have that. So I'm not sure. I know that they just make a straight up output buffer that you can buy as an individual. I don't know that they're transformer isolated though. Do you know if the TC buffers... I mean, the reality is, Jeffrey, it's not just TC. It's almost any pedal. Like, even my pedals, except for the Boost, which has its dedicated buffer, they're not designed to drive long lines. They're just not. Even the best ones that have a buffer in them, it's typically sort of an afterthought. Most pedals are not designing their delays to have the great buffers that, say, the Mesa Boogie would, somebody whose sole purpose is to be a buffer. So now there might be some people that say, well, I use my Strymon Blue Sky and it sounds great, and it may, in your context, it may work. But I would argue that if they put their whole rig in a true bypass looper and bypassed it so that they were just getting their amp and their guitar, and then they'd bring in this, they would hear a loss, or they would hear a change. Now, it may not sound bad, but it's not going to be identical. So that's just something to consider. But most pedals are not built, like I was saying, even mine, I couldn't expect this to drive a 20-foot cable. Because a distortion pedal is not designed with that in mind. It's designed to be a great distortion pedal to work with other pedals. It's not designed to be a line driver in addition to that. The best dedicated buffer, again, that's commercially available, that I could stake my reputation on, as much or as little as that means to you, is the Mesa Boogie one. I think it sounds the best. I think it's the most neutral, and I think it's the best built. Like, conceptually what it does is doing what a buffer is supposed to do. So I would say that that's the best one. There's some people that don't like input buffers. A lot of professionals that I know don't like input buffers. I think a lot of that is that they don't know necessarily what they're listening for, and I think that they have old, kind of antiquated point of views about what buffers actually are supposed to do. Because in the old days, the buffers were not great. You know, they tended to add a lot of high end, and they weren't as neutral as some of them are now. But do I recommend other ones? I think the Empress is pretty good if you need to run stereo. It has a lot of options. I think that from a commercial standpoint, those are the only two I could really say are really excellent sounding and well built. So Mesa Boogie Highwire and Stowaways, they're like other output buffer if you want to have stereo. Or the Empress, I think, is also good, although it doesn't have a dedicated input buffer. I believe it's the same buffer twice, so they use the same section as the output as they do on the input. I could be wrong about that, but the older one that I've seen, it appeared that it was the same buffer replicated in both spots, in input and output. Oh, you got it on the spring cleaning coupon. Yeah, we were running a spring cleaning for a lot of our B stock last week, and we had a couple of people here cash those in. Somebody said, well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, Necrosonic, because there's things that people have done historically to sort of undo problems. And I think in the case of Jimi Hendrix, he's doing something specific with the coily cable because of something that he experienced with his amplifier. Because those old Marshalls, if you've played one, some of them are incredibly bright. Like, they're incredibly bright and can be thin sounding. And by adding all that capacitance to them, it can sort of undo some of that brightness, you know, as a way to kind of dull it out a little bit. And so I can completely see that in certain contexts it would be necessary to use a coily cable and not use a buffer if you have a super bright amp and you don't have anybody to mod it. And, you know, I think that there are contexts where some of these things are appropriate because there were just fewer tools available to people to work with at that time. Oh, I think it's a legitimate question, Necrosonic. I think that you know, when sometimes people ask, well, you know, should I get, you know, new boutique amp XYZ instead of whatever they currently have? And, you know, the thing I always think of is like, well, you know, like, what classic recording that we all love hasn't been played on some Marshall or Fender, or, you know, maybe in more modern days, Mesa Boogie or Dumble. Like, there's really a limited number of amps that have been used for most of the Icona recordings. So there's certainly something right about that. The problem is that a lot of that equipment is not available to most of us anymore. You know, that was the norm at that time. So I don't know if it's a fair comparison to say that you know, Hendrix didn't use a buffer, so nobody should. I think that he would. You know, people would have if that was the norm at that time. I think now things have changed. You know, there's more available to us. Information is available to us more than ever before. So if you can improve something, why not compensate for it properly instead of having to use these workarounds? It's kind of the way I think about it. Alright, let's see. Any thoughts on buffers and a Morley wah pedal? Not great buffers, you know. But again, we shouldn't expect them to be. That's not what they're designed for. I would say, you know, when you can, and if you can put them in a true bypass loop, I think that will, you know, that will be a better place for them. And that's not to say that they're any worse than anything else. Again, as far as the quality of the buffer, it's just that's not what its purpose is. Its purpose is to be a wah. Kyle, I do not make any pre-made buffer interfaces. They're all custom, and I only make them for rigs that I'm building. I just don't have the time to make it as a commercially available product. Sonia, we don't have those available to order. It's pretty much just for the purposes of building the rigs that we have here, and I don't offer them as one-offs for the public. Does the Boss volume pedal work with the Vertex Boost? Any volume pedal will work with the Vertex Boost or expression pedal. You just need to either use an insert cable or a TRS cable. Hi, Alexander. AJ, I don't know what BPTA is. Thanks, Alexandre. AJ, I still don't know what BPTA is. Necrosonic, but a serious question, how about buffers in relation to using your volume knob? I don't know that there's any correlation between the two. What do you mean? You'd have to clarify what you mean by that, Necrosonic. Mostly torso, a little off topic, so I understand if you want to skip this question. I'm looking for an attenuator that doesn't change my sound. Whew. Well, a cool one that a lot of people sleep on is called a Power Soak, and it's that Tom Schultz one from the 80s. It sounds really good. It's maybe not going to sound 100% like your amp, but it sounds really good. And I don't mean that to say that like it's a compromise in still sound good. It's like it adds something to the amp that's not there before, but in a really good way. It's kind of how I mean it. That's one of my favorites. I also like the aux box is pretty good to use as an attenuator. I'm supposed to get one of the Boss amp expanders. They're sending one of those to me, I think, next week. So I'm anxious to try that one out, and we're going to do a three-way shootout between the Boss amp expander, the Two Notes Torpedo Live, and the aux box. We're going to do that with Prashant Aswani. If you haven't checked him out, check him out. He's an amazing guitar player. We're going to do kind of like a three-way shootout with those and kind of see what the ultimate sort of box is, an attenuator. So stay tuned for that. Another one that's really good, mostly torso, is the Ultimate Attenuator. I liked a lot. I also like this other one called the Faustine Phantom. Should be back. All right. So mostly torso. I would just say the ones to get: Ultimate Attenuator, Faustine Phantom Attenuator was really good. The Tom Schultz one was great. The Power Soak. I'd say check those out first. Let's see. Pedal gear outfit. Is this you, Doug? On Worship Musician Magazine. Okay, I know what you're talking about, the BTPA thing. I got it now, AJ. Well, do they make their own cables? I was under the impression that they used like other companies' cables and then they made stuff like that. But I could be wrong. Looks like Worship Musician Magazine's already tried the Waza Tuba amp expander. I'm looking forward to trying ours as soon as it gets here. Jimmy, undoubtedly Pelican cases are my favorite. Undoubtedly. They're the lightest and the most protective. Yeah, mostly torso. I mean, they're all gonna do something. They're not gonna sound perfect, you know, because you're changing the whole interaction between the amp and the speaker. But I think that ooh, that's cool. Tone Secret #1. Didn't realize that this client had #1. I never keep #1 for myself. I don't believe in that. I think that people deserves to be out in the field. Zach at Mythos Pedals has the first dynamic distortion ever made. So if anybody wants to make him an offer, he can't refuse. Hey, Doug. AJ, I don't know if they make their own. That's cool. I can't really speak to it. I think that Mogami is really to me the gold standard. I think it sounds the best. I think it's the most neutral, and I think it's the most available. Anybody could, you know, find Mogami cable anywhere, and it's very predictable, I think, in terms of the results. Cool. If they offer wiring other people's sonar, again, I haven't seen the work. I'm sure it's nice, but I don't really know what their, you know, what their ideology is and how they think about things or the skill level. You know, stuff can look nice, and that can often get a lot of us to think that something's great. You know, I would rather I'd rather have a mediocre looking pedal board that functioned extraordinarily than one that was perfect and pristine and not really that functional. So there's some things that they can be masked. I was thinking you lose a buffer with no. Well, it doesn't really work that way if you use high quality cables, because what a lot of us consider high quality cables are really just, well, all cables are filters, and they just make the sound different depending on what the goal of the cable maker is and what the goal of the person choosing it is. But yeah, high quality cables won't change capacitance. There's still a finite capacitance in every cable. Some may be lower, some may be higher. But capacitance doesn't always mean everything sonically. You can find some low capacitance cables that sound terrible. You can find some high capacitance cables that sound incredible. So it's not just all about capacitance. I think the most important cable, if you're trying to use it for a sonic benefit, is if you have a good quality buffer on the input and output. Like, again, I know I'm plugging them a lot today, but I really like it, is the high wire. The most important cable that you could use is the one going from the guitar into the buffer, because that's the one that's going to have the color of that cable is going to be seen by everything, because there's nothing to condition that cable. Once it's on the board and you go to Mogami, which is what I recommend, that 2319, that's a pretty predictable sound throughout. But the one going in is not going to be conditioned at all. If you want to experiment with different types of cables, that would be the place to do it. On the board itself, I highly recommend you stick with 2319. Hey Doug, as far as the PBC6, I'm supposed to get one. I'm supposed to get one in the next couple weeks. So I talked to Sherry, and she's going to send us one for this one rig that we're going to be building. I'm really excited because I want to use it on my own rig. I haven't built a rig for myself in like a decade. So I'm hoping that it's the one, and I'll use that on my rig as well. AJ, GLS versus Switchcraft. Well, I think that for the pedal board, like stationary stuff, I think the GLS is fine. I don't think you have any benefit of using the Switchcraft. In fact, from a electrical standpoint, there's less capacitance in the GLS than there is on the Switchcraft by about half. So electrically, they're superior. Quality wise, you know, the GLS, you'll get one that's funky every once in a while, but by and large, they're pretty reliable. I haven't had any failures that happen in the field. I've had failures that I found here before I started, like you know, testing stuff. I found failures. But I've never seen a failure of the actual mechanics of one once it was like already built and working and tested. So it seems like if they're working when you assemble them, usually it's a cable failure, not a connector failure, that I'll see if something happens in the field. So, and then Neutrik, the only good reason to use Neutrik is for instrument cables, stuff that's getting plugged in and unplugged all the time. I wouldn't recommend Switchcraft or GLS for those sorts of things. Guitar into pedal board or pedal board to amp, that would be a place to use Neutrik. But I don't think for a pedal board on the pedal board itself it's advisable. Square plugs, I haven't tried them. I had talked to them about maybe sending us some samples, but they won't send samples, so I didn't feel, you know, any additional impetus to follow up with them regarding getting some samples here to try them out. I've heard good things, but I haven't seen any samples, so I haven't done any electrical measurements of them to see what the actual capacitance is, stuff like that. They look really cool though. I'm not opposed to using them at all. I just wanted to get some samples to try them for myself, and it didn't seem like that was an option at the time, that they didn't offer that. So maybe in the future somebody will have some and I can try them out that way. But I'm happy with the results of the GLS, so unless otherwise specified, I would continue to use those. AJ, I don't know the price of them, but for value on GLS, I don't think you can beat them. They're pretty incredibly priced for what they are, and pretty much everybody in the industry is using those. I mean, I see some people use square plugs on occasion, but even like Robert Bradshaw and like old school pedalboard build guides, I see using the GLS now. He's kind of moving away from the Switchcraft. Let's see. SKman22. Any chance you'd build a MIDI cable or a MIDI cable build? I see. I can show. I mean, I can show you in a video how I would do it, but I'm not selling them. But you know, really really the only thing that you need is the center 3 leads to match up. So if you're talking about a MIDI cable, and I don't know how well we can see this here. Let's see if I can get it in focus. It looks like it might be too small for me to focus this type of lens on it. But there's 3 pins that are part of every MIDI plug, or that are actually useful, and it's the 3 in the middle of any MIDI plug that are actually the ones that we use for most guitar-related stuff. So if you're wiring this up and you have a MIDI connector like this, as long as the 3 pins match each other on each side, you're good. You don't need to wire the outside pins because those are typically for phantom power. But the other thing to remember is if you're wanting to do like that 3-way MIDI cable like I did for Rhett Shull or that I did for Anthony on one of the other videos, I essentially like tripled down. So I had 3 small cables going to each one of these pins, and then they split out into like a 3-way splitter, so each one fed a Strymon pedal. And the main reason why we did that is just so you didn't have this really polluted space of MIDI ins and outs on all 3 Strymon pedals. You just had one input going into each one of the MIDI ins, and that was it. So it just keeps it cleaner, and you know, it's still effective. And I actually found out how to do that, or I tried it out when I had a pedal that didn't work well with Strymons as far as transmitting the MIDI signal, which was a source audio pedal. And so I needed to get a MIDI splitter, but it couldn't fit. And so I had to make that splitter out of the cable end, and so that was the way that I did it. But maybe we can make one in the future, but a lot of people are less interested in that stuff, so it would have to be kind of it would be a video that I would expect would only appeal to like 100 people, maybe less. Strymon bridge. Yeah, I noticed that there's now a Strymon bridge being sold on Reverb, so it's caught on. And here's another one. This one's actually wider than the Strymon bridge. It's as big as this pedal board. This is for an upcoming build that we have that actually is using a combination of like Strymon and Boss, like the DD500 and the MD500 and some of the bigger kind of competitors of the Strymon stuff. So this is going to be a crazy one. This is like the Strymon Plus bridge. Jesus, well, we talked about it a little bit earlier in the video. So, and this video will become part of our normal YouTube syndication as soon as the video's over. But the main thing that I talked about, and I'll just reiterate it for people that are kind of new, is that I think the switcher is valuable for live musicians. If you play in a band where you have a predictable set list that is being replicated night in and night out, there's a lot of value in having a switcher because you can program one thing and you can recall it over and over and over again, and you can organize it in a way that allows you to be able to do that. But a lot of us that's really not our context, but we hear from people of the value of the switcher and how it preserves tone and how it isolates issues. And some of those things are true to a degree, but for most players at home, they don't require those needs because they're not actually playing the same set list over and over again, or they're not playing a predictable set list in their church. You know, if they're doing worship music, I can see the value in that context because there's a predictability in the music that you're playing. But you're not going to be at any greater of a benefit by using a switcher if you're playing at your house and you just like to rock out in your music room. Like, it's just not it's not a valuable context for this particular application. So for this reason, because, you know, like guys like session guys are not playing the same stuff every day, they typically never have switchers. And the best guys in the industry, whether you're talking about Derek Wells or Tom Bukovac or Michael Landau or Michael Thompson or any of the guys historically that have done this, they don't use switchers in the studios because they can't change things very quickly. And the switchers can take some time to change settings. I mean, there's guys who are really expert at creating pages and doing all these things, but for most of the session musicians, like, they don't want to risk upsetting a producer because they need to change a tremolo speed in an instant. They want to be able to reach down, change a knob, and then that's it. It's done. Whereas the switchers, there can be a lot more complications because you have a lot more moving parts. So if something goes wrong, it can be a lot more difficult. If there's like an actual functional software issue, it's not just an easy plug and play fix. So I think, again, if you're playing live, you have a repeatable set list, definitely get the switcher without question. It's a great move. If you're not doing that and you're playing at home mostly, or you're playing all different sorts of stuff, or you're doing a lot of studio stuff, the value of that is diminished. Most players do not need a switcher, and that's the honest truth. A lot of us like the idea of it, or a lot of us have been told that it's a great thing and that it preserves all this tone. But honestly, if you've done the board right, you've had a professional do it, or you're following these videos, I'm confident that you wouldn't need one to be able to reproduce the sound that you're looking for. It's not a prerequisite for that. Where's all the connections to Asia from California? Is it possible to compete with their prices in the United States concerning pedals? Is it possible to compete with Asia? Well, as far as manufacturing is concerned, I think it's hard to compete with their prices. Absolutely. I mean, you have to really want to have something that's manufactured in the U.S. in order to make it here. But all of us, all the pedal manufacturers, are having to buy parts in China. It's like, I don't know of a potentiometer manufacturer that's manufacturing in the United States. Even if it's a U.S. based company, they're in all likelihood manufacturing in China. Even if you're buying it from a U.S. based company, it's unavoidable in the current landscape. But I think the misnomer, to be honest about what's, the stuff like with Chinese made products, is that you can get incredible quality in China. And I think that the misnomer is that the quality needs to be bad. I think the difference is that you can get stuff made worse in China than you can in the United States, because people are willing to build you stuff that is dirt cheap and terribly made. And if that's their goal, is to just hit a price point no matter what the cost is, they'll do it. Where a lot of U.S. manufacturers will say, I won't build something that poorly made. It's just not, we just don't do that here. Whereas in China, my impression in talking with a lot of process engineers that work in China and work here is that you can get something built cheaper there in quality, cheaper than what kind of the floor is in the U.S. for building cheap stuff. But if you want to have great quality stuff built, you can. And I think like things like the iPhone or Apple products are indicative of there being able to be great products that are made in China. All of us, or many of us who are watching this right now, have an iPhone that's made in China. And I think the iPhone is a great technology tool. And I think that although it's made in China, it is an incredible piece of equipment. And so I think that we can get good stuff made in China. I think that we can get good stuff made in China cheaper than we can in the U.S., but I also think you can get stuff that is competitive with U.S. stuff, even though it's cheaper made in China. So I don't know if that answers your question or if I just totally went off topic here, but that's my China story. All right. Are you wholesale electronics? Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that whole industry changed dramatically. I think largely before I even got into this. You know, that shift was happening. I don't know. Is this the new Grand Canyon? Maybe it is. I don't know a lot about the electroharmonics effect, so I can see that the marker here on this knob is pretty much gone. um, So Jake Cooper said, "What about the switchers that have a memory manual settings? Any thoughts on those at all?" Are you saying comparatively to what, Jake? That's the question that I have. Um, so clarify that for me, and I'll answer it. Worship Musician Magazine. So on switching boards, since they're non-series, do you place pedals where you would if there was no switcher? Typically, I do. I mean, on some of the switchers, the matrix doesn't allow for you to swap order, so it's only on certain ones that can happen. So you just need to keep in mind whether that's a possibility. I still order them accordingly because there's a lot of extra steps in many cases that requires to change the matrix to swap things or put them in series or parallel. So I usually wire them as though I was doing it normally, unless there's like some sort of space barrier that I would need to mitigate, and therefore I'd have to like kind of change how I'd order something, but that would be rare. Alex, no, they're all buffered. No matter what the positioning of the dip switch is on the Vertex Boost. One position, the expression pedal works all the time. The other one, it only works in when the pedal is on. But the output buffer is always active. Let's see. If using two stowaways with a stereo rig, you only have one cable from your guitar, how would you set up the second buffer for in-out? Well, Kyle, so I think the stowaway, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's just an output buffer. So you would still use this for input and your first output, and then your second output buffer for the, let's say, the right side of the stereo rig would go through the stowaway. Glad you dig it, Alex. Hey, Braxel, you're back. let's see. Late to the show, but wondering the GLS plugs fit on the back of a ES8. GLS plugs will, but you'll have to use the straight orientation. The any other orientation will not work. So that's like you have to use a straight cable or connector like this. The one that I like best is actually made by a company called Iconic Cables, and this is theirs. And the reason why I like it is it's the same size as a Switchcraft 380, but it has the benefit of having a, I don't know if you can see this in the focus, but it has a strain relief that you can actually crimp. Whereas on a 380, you have to just build it up with heat shrink as best you can and hope nobody pulls it this way, because otherwise it's toast. So this is actually a better connector, I think, than the Switchcraft Mini kind of straights. And if you look in our description, you can see these Iconic cables listed there. And I try to buy, 100 of them whenever I see them, because they're really valuable. They're worth their weight in gold. Braxel. If I got a PVC 6X and an RGM Gizmo, can I use the Gizmo in 2 of the 6 loops? You'd have probably better question to ask Ron or Sherry. I'm not familiar with the Gizmo, so I can't speak to that. But I know that there's actually 7 loops in there, because they have 1 loop insert that you can use as an additional loop. So, that could be a possibility if you want to add another pedal. Do you think the EBS Gold flat cables are any good? Compared to a soldered cable, no. If you're just using it for around home, no, why not? William Zeke is inside. He was getting into a shouting match with the dog next door, so we put him inside. Doug, you should bring your 6X over here and we'll mess around with it. I hope I get mine next week, but it looks cool. Danish manufacturers, well, none of those. My impression was that TC got bought by Harman, so I'm pretty sure. I don't think it's Danish anymore, is it? And T-Rex, I've heard, is out of business. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. I love a lot of the old TC electronics. I love the 2290. I love the Nova delay. That's like one of my favorite delays ever made, and it works great in effects loops, which is cool. And I love the T-Rex replica. That's one of my favorite delays as well. I think that they both had great runs, and they made some really great stuff at different times. What's the best way to plug an analog pedal board into a PA system? Unfortunately, a mic in front of an amp is not an option. Well, you could check out the Cab Zeus, as mentioned earlier here. Cab Zeus is great. It's made by, what's the company called? They're in Singapore or Indonesia, I think. And they make great stuff. So just check out the Cab Zeus. That's a way that you could do it. Those are pretty cool. So that would work. Also, surprisingly, the cab simulator out of the Strymon Big Sky actually sounds pretty good, surprisingly. Not that it's surprising that Strymon could make a cab sim, but it's just like, I don't usually expect that out of a pedal that's not designed to do that feature normally. So that's something to consider. Yeah, Doug, I'll text you. Let's get together. So Braxel, they make it custom, so you have to email them and say, hey, I watched Mason's video, I need a Strymon tier, and then you send them the dimensions that you want, unless you just want exactly what I have. But they'll also make you custom stuff if you need to be a little bit wider or a little deeper or whatever it is. But if you say Strymon Bridge, they're going to know what you mean. Just tell me watch the video, and you're going to talk to a guy named Roy, and he's going to set you up. T-Rex filed for bankruptcy but are back in business from what I've heard. Well, that's great, because the replica is a killer pedal. I love that. Lava soldered cables. The cables themselves or the connectors? I don't... I can't speak to their cables, like the sound of them, but I haven't used them in a long time. I'd tried them for a couple of years back when Mark had owned the company, um, and he had sent me out some different varieties, and I thought some of them were sounded good and were certainly well made, unquestionably. I just preferred the Mogami for the ease of assembly, and also just for the overall sound in the context of a pedal board. Some of the lava cables, I thought I preferred them as just like instrument cables, like guitar into the pedal board. They had a couple of cool ones, depending on what sound you're going for. But on the pedal board itself, there were other things that I preferred. But again, this is sort of a personal preference. You know, when somebody comes to me and asks me what I think, that's what I would recommend to them. That doesn't mean that you may agree with me on that, because the sound stuff is really, really tricky. You know, everybody hears things a little different. Well, I'm glad for T-Rex. That's great news. And TC Electronics still, I mean, I don't know a lot about what their operations look like now. I know that they've always had really well thought out stuff. I'm sure it was a huge loss that Tor is gone from TC, because I know that he was kind of one of the driving forces there. But you know, TC does a good job. I think that they make cool pedals. They're good value. Nothing wrong with them whatsoever. What do you think? The Boss pedalboard cables? Does Boss make pedalboard cables? Alright, get some sleep, Necrosonic 1. What type of replacement sockets surround plastic tape? The 1971 Marshall 100 watt head. I am not a Marshall expert. I don't know. But you could email me and I will set you up with somebody that I know is a Marshall expert and could answer that question for you without any doubt. I would just be guessing. Braxel, I think you're against solderless cables, but why do guys like the Gigrig insist on using Evidence audio cables? I can't speak for them, so I don't know. I could only hypothesize why, but I'm not going to do that. It's certainly easier and more time efficient, but I think if you look at the guys who've done pedal boards and racks historically, you know, we're talking as far back as Paul Rivera, Robert Bradshaw, Dave Friedman, Exactone in Nashville, technicians that do this all over the country. I don't know of any of them that would prefer a soldered cable or a solderless cable to a soldered cable. Soldered always wins over. The resistance, the types of cables that you can use are not limited, and solderless has come a long way, but it is not, in my mind, I could not send out a pedal board in good conscience using a solderless cable, because they're doomed for failure as well built as they can be. And I would say even soldered cables are doomed for failure at a certain point, but the longevity is such that I think that it is a much better solution. So I'm not endorsing solderless cables. People use them. I think it's a consumer-based, consumer-level product. I don't think it's a professional-level product yet. Maybe that will change in the future, but right now I'm not seeing that it would warrant professionals using it, and that's why I don't see professionals largely using it. There's the one you mentioned. They use it. I don't see any others that have been doing this for more than 10 years that use that at all. Is Howard Dumble still alive? To my knowledge, he's still alive. All right, see you later, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, Dave Friedman is... I remember seeing Dave Friedman when I was a kid at Making Music or when he was working at Andy Brower's, you know, and he was doing tech stuff for like Michael Landau and guys like that. And he's been around this business forever, and I know he tries a lot of stuff, and I think he's a pretty good barometer for stuff that's really like real world workable, and if it was useful, he would do it. And he would use it, and I think Robert Bradshaw the same way. Like, they make their livings on providing people with workable pedalboard solutions and rack solutions. And if there was something that gave them fear or pause, they would not use that. This is my opinion. Yeah. Tom, I'm with him. Dave and I are in complete agreement. Matthew, usually cold solder comes with either not enough heat or it could be an unclean surface. But typically, if you use enough heat, you apply enough heat, you use a good quality solder, and I've linked all the good stuff in the description of all of our videos, you should not have a problem. And I've done some good soldering tutorials. You just need to make sure you get your iron real hot, having a variable temperature. I'm usually leaving mine somewhere around maybe 850 degrees Fahrenheit is what I leave mine at, and that seems to be, you know, be able to get in and out, having different tips. That helps a lot too. Well, George-L's, Kyle, are like the worst offender. I mean, like, they were the first to come out and very groundbreaking in that sense. But I also think that as a result of that, you know, a lot of the solderless growing pains were used up on George-L's. I certainly think that Evidence and Lava make significantly better solderless cables than the original George-L's. But I understand George-L's changed, so maybe they're better now. I don't know. You know, some guys like the way the George-L's sound, though, and even guys like Oznoy, he uses George-L's, and he has them soldered. You know, so he just literally takes like a GLS plug and solders the George-L directly to it. It's a real pain, but if you like the sound of them, they're pretty bright. But some people like that. How many hours does it take to put a pedal together? Like, oh, I'm sure you mean a pedal board. I think Rhett's took like 2.5 days, something like that. And I was probably maybe working on it like 7 hours a day, something like that. But we were doing a lot of stopping and going and filming, and so it was a little bit different than if I were just going straight through. Evidence SIS is great in a pinch. Yeah, when you need to replace a bad cable. Yeah, I mean, I think St. Pope here is right. I think that if you're just trying to get something together fast, I think the Evidence is the best I've seen. I understand there's other ones out there of the solderless variety, but you know, pedal boards are going to vibrate, they're going to shake, they're going to move. This is the enemy of anything that's relying on tension to keep a connection together. You know, tension to hold everything. And so when its vibrations happen, things are just naturally going to get loose. That's unavoidable. Braxel, I didn't look at the stomp trap yet. Tom, we do, but we will build pedal boards for anybody, but we're more discerning in that because I don't do this for a living. This is just fun. Like, I'm doing this on a Saturday on a live stream because it's just fun for me. And, you know, I wanted to dedicate some of the extra time, you know, now that our pedal business is really thriving and I have a lot more extra time to dedicate to doing more service-oriented stuff in the industry. And so this is part of the component of that. And so I only do 2 pedal boards a month is all I commit to. And I want to use those pedal boards to illustrate certain things to teach other people how to do. Because the goal here is for me to show you so that you don't have to ask somebody like me to do anything like this. You don't have to go to anybody else. I teach you how to fish. So if there's a pedal board that can illustrate a certain problem or a certain thing that we want to show solutions for, those are the pedal board things that we take on. Now, I do charge money for this service, but I'm looking specifically at opportunities where there isn't a lot of information about a certain topic. And so I'll look for pedal boards in our inquiries that cover those topics. I'm also happy to refer you to people that actually do this for a living and that do great jobs. So if I'm not your guy, there's a lot of other people that could do this. So if you email me, just info@vertexeffects, or you can use our email contact page. on our website at vertexfx.com, and you can tell me about what you're looking to do, and I can tell you if it's something that might fit into what we're doing or something that we're not. The soonest opening I have for any build at this point wouldn't be until July. So I have 2 slots booked all the way through July, and I have one that's already booked in July. So I have like 1 spot left in July, and that's it. And then it would have to be after that if it wasn't workable. You got it, Tom. All right. Well, it looks like we're on about... Let's see. Hey, Daniel. You know, I used to be a competitive bodybuilder. So I used to be super lean. But yeah, I just went and did a brutal leg workout with Zapata. If you know who King Zapata is, the guitar player in Gary Clark Jr.'s band, he's a savage. And we just did like a brutal CrossFit tire flipping, squat deadlift. If I'm looking slimmer, it's because we worked our butts off there. That was brutal, like almost vomit inducing. So shout out to Zapata. My legs are going to be feeling it tomorrow. Let's see. Thomas Hannon. Is soldering a cable is meant to be solderless lava, for example? Any recommendation on soldering process that may be different? You know, the only difference will be typically like George L's or have just like a different way that they insulate and braid. So it's just kind of harder to get through it to get it ready, but the actual soldering component is really the same. It's just on George L's in particular, on George L's in particular, they have a weird insulator that you actually have to like literally like shave away with a X-Acto knife because you can't peel it, and so it just takes a lot of time. On lavas, I don't remember exactly. I remember they had a really thick braid to them, and you could use like a screwdriver or something to kind of like separate it, and that made it a little easier. But they're definitely not as easy to assemble as Mogami from an assembly standpoint. But the same thing applies. All right, I think this board is looking good. Got everything kind of dialed, and I'll remove this stuff. I'm going to drill some stuff in, but I've put in a good 2 hours. So, unless there's any last questions, I will sign off for today. Canary cable, yeah, I like it. I like it. It has a certain sound. It's not a bad sound. I like it. It tends to be a little warmer than Mogami, I'd say, a little less mid-range. Another one I really like is Belden 9778. It's like the fattest, like for a Strat or a Tele, like single coils. It sounds huge. It can sometimes be a little woofy with humbuckers. Trying to think of other ones I like. I like Gepco, X-Band for effects loops in particular. By the way, using different cables for effects loops is advisable. The lowest capacitance you can find, like I've even used like low capacitance mic cable before for the purposes of the effects loop. So it's really important to go as low capacitance as possible on the send and return cables that are going into effects loop. If you're using one, if you're not using one, forget everything I'm saying. But if you are, I think the Gepco X-Band is a good one. Cool, mostly torso. Bob Kelly. So I've tried Holy Board instead of Velcro, but not happy with it. Yeah, I mean, I think that the best one is the dual lock. It's gonna mess up some of your stickers, But one thing you can do that that's cool is you can just go to like a sheet metal shop and literally just have them make a sheet metal outline for your pedal if you have like a Klon or something like that, and you just replace the bottom with that, or just put it over the existing bottom and then Velcro to that, and just have them put the screw holes in the right place. And usually sheet metals will have like some sort of shop minimum, but if you're making bottoms for 10 pedals or 15 pedals, you know, you should be within the shop minimum. And so you could just have them, you know, program that into their machines. They could cut out bottoms for you. And I've seen guys do this where they just get like fabbed aluminum, you know, like in .080 or something like that, and just have that kind of live between the bottom of the actual pedal and then the Velcro surface. Okay, Brad, so I'm going to check out the Stomp Trap. I'm going to do it right now while you're here. Okay, let's see. Stomp Trap. I'm scrolling way back to 2 hours ago. Okay, Stomp Trap. I'm looking at it. It's loading. I'm looking at the photos here. Huh. Yeah, I mean, it looks really expensive for what it is. I guess the only advantage would be if you don't want to mess up your pedals, but then you can do what I was suggesting before, which is just get some sheet metal pieces and you can just have them custom to every piece. But, you know, if your pedals are being used, I don't think you should be concerned about the Velcro residue or anything like that. I mean, you can get all that stuff off if you're just strategic about where you put everything. Cool. You start one in Thailand. Yep, Zeke's here. Zeke! Let's see. Basically, well, what the bot? All right, William, I got your solution right here, though. I put Velcro on this just now, but this is a totally clean surface. All you do with the Boss pedals, you just flip them over. You just peel off the bottom, and then you can just turn it over. Or you can even leave the bottom on and just get longer screws, and then it just sandwiches the rubber in there. That's the easiest way. That's free, you know, really. Yep. All right, guys. Well, have a great Sunday or Saturday night. I'm off to cook some polenta. Stage fix fasteners. Huh. Alright, y'all. Yeah, William, you won't damage the rubber. If you get longer screws, you can just put the rubber side down, and you just need longer screws to make it all the way into the threading. I'm glad, Zach. See you later, guys.